I'd like to start with a bit of an extract from my own work. Not for self-promotion, but to make a point. This is one of my favourite things that I've ever written. There May Be Trouble Ahead. This is like a mocked up version for a film I was going to make. And it also contains one of my favourite characters that I've ever written, Erasmus. So I'd like to share with you a little extract. Erasmus got some of his words in a terrible muddle. For instance, his own name, which he could only pronounce as Christmas. Knowing this wasn't right, he instead took on whatever name he happened to fancy at the time, and was always offended when people got it wrong. Seamus would often get it wrong on purpose. Meanwhile, the Nazis had been rechristened as Nasties, which was apt, whilst the then Prime Minister was Neville Chamberlain, and if you asked Erasmus, he had spent the last few years throwing peas at Hitler. London was undone, the sisters who came to give us our lessons were sissies, and we all lived in a great big whale. The point I'm trying to make, throwing peas at Hitler. Well, when you consider appeasement, the policy of Britain and France in the 1930s to, try and prevent war with Germany because nobody wanted another war after the First World War. When you consider that, throwing things at Hitler might have been more effective than doing nothing.
Hitler has only got one ball. Goebbels had two, but very small.
But let's go back to Neville Chamberlain for a second. Neville Chamberlain. Oh, he didn't just let Hitler do whatever he wanted. Oh, no. It was worse than that. It was a lot worse. So it's the 1930s. The First World War is still very fresh in the memory. It was a traumatic global event. The British public didn't want another war like that. The politicians certainly didn't want another war like that. The Conservative Party, Stanley Baldwin, Neville Chamberlain, didn't want another war. The Labour Party didn't want another war either, and they were headed by the pacifist George Lansbury. I don't want war, I want peace. I want peace on earth. I want to get rid of all military. I think we should just have rainbows in the sky all the time. Wouldn't that be nice? We should have peace, not war. You remember the First World War, don't you? It was terrible. When you look at it in the context of the time, appeasement certainly seemed appealing. And there are those who've argued that it was really the only possible policy which any government of the time could take. A.J.P. Taylor, the famous historian, suggested that Hitler actually had no idea what he was doing, and therefore, because he was so unpredictable, nobody else had any idea either, and so the only thing they could do was appeasement and see what he did next. Rather a narrow-minded viewpoint, actually, because wouldn't you know it, Hitler said exactly what he was going to do in a little book he wrote in 1925 called Mein Kampf, in which he outlines his policy of Lebensraum, or living space for the German people, which You know, basically amounted to invading Eastern Europe. Then you have John F. Core, a professor of German literature, who reported to the US ambassador in Berlin that whilst at a dinner party with Hitler, he'd heard Hitler discussing the Holocaust, or what would become the Holocaust. And then, you know, you've got support for other right-wing dictators like Mussolini, support for Franco's Spain, fascist Spain, the Anschluss with Austria in 1938. So by the time of the Munich Agreement in September 1938, it should have been pretty obvious what Hitler was doing. So why was Chamberlain in particular so taken in? Why did he believe that Hitler wanted peace? Why did he believe that Hitler wasn't going to invade the rest of Czechoslovakia? Why did he wave his piece of paper in the air and promise peace in our time? Why did he believe Hitler when it was so obvious what Hitler was doing? I mean, nobody wanted war, yes, right? Not Chamberlain, not the Conservative Party, not George Lansbury. In fact, the only person who really wanted war was Winston Churchill, but didn't he always want war? So why was Chamberlain so taken in? And surely, by the Munich Agreement, September 1938, anything would have been better than doing nothing. At least as far as Hitler was concerned. Throwing peas at him.
Okay, 20 points if you get him in the nut.
Chamberlain was told at one point that Hitler had referred to him as Arschloch, arsehole. And yet, knowing what Hitler thought about him, knowing that he was laughing at him behind his back, Chamberlain still didn't act. Chamberlain was still taken in by Hitler. The problem was, Chamberlain just refused to believe that Hitler was anything but a complete and total gentleman. He refused to believe that Hitler would keep all his promises, that he wouldn't go back on his word, that after the Munich Agreement he wouldn't invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. He refused to believe that Hitler actually wanted a war with Europe. He refused to believe that Hitler really thought he was an Arschloch. He just thought Hitler was totally trustworthy, totally a man of his word, despite all the evidence to the contrary. But it gets worse though. It gets a lot worse, especially as far as Neville Chamberlain was concerned. Because before the Munich Agreement, Neville Chamberlain and the head of the civil service, Horace Wilson, were informed that no matter what was decided, no matter what was done, no matter what was agreed in Munich, Hitler, the man with one ball and the other in the Albert Hall, was still going to invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain and Wilson ignored this intelligence. There was signals intelligence from a conversation Hitler and the Germans were having with the Japanese that Hitler was going to declare total war on Britain. Neville Chamberlain ignored this intelligence. 1939, August 1939, a month before the Second World War begins, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, or von Ribbentrop Pact. Germany allies with Russia, agrees we're not going to invade each other. There were warnings about it, intelligence warnings. Guess what Neville Chamberlain did? Nothing, nada. Ignored. All of it. Intelligence of what Hitler was doing was ignored by Neville Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain just didn't want to know. He didn't want anything negative on his desk about Hitler or what Hitler was doing. He only wanted positive stuff about Germany. He outright ignored everything. He, in favour of peace, ignored warnings that there was going to be another war. Even when war was looking inevitable, he ignored the warnings. And that kind of makes appeasement worse than just doing nothing, just letting Hitler get away with his stuff. It makes Chamberlain complicit by his ignorance in Hitler's crimes in the 1930s and beyond even. It makes Chamberlain complicit in creating the Second World War, in creating the conditions which led to the Second World War. Would the Second World War have been any easier if Chamberlain hadn't ignored these warnings? Would it have resulted in the same outcome? Would we still have beaten Germany? Who's to say? Doing what-ifs with history is complicated and basically just guesswork. But steps could have been taken to mitigate some of the effects. Lives could have been saved. Was appeasement necessary? Maybe. Maybe not. But by ignoring the warning signs, by doing what he did, Neville Chamberlain was definitely a guilty man.